One seat too many, and one guest who'll never leave. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombra. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in. Your voices shape this mystery family. I love reading, everyone. Let's begin. If you've never watched a man eat breakfast like he was conducting a symphony, then you've never seen Nero Wolfe with a plate of ham and eggs in front of him. He had the fork in one hand and the knife in the other, but you would have sworn he had a baton. The yolk of the second egg had to be coaxed, not broken, and he was more devoted to the toast's butter ratio than most men are to their wives. Me, I was across the table with my own coffee and roll, leaning back, trying to decide whether to bring up the mail or let him polish off the last bite in peace. I didn't get to decide. The doorbell cut in, sharp and long, like someone leaning on it with a purpose. Fritz was upstairs in the plant rooms delivering Wolfe his morning beer. It was a warm day and Fritz had taken pity, so the honor of answering fell to me. Now, you may say a doorbell is no big deal. Happens every day, right? Not at our house. We've got a system, carefully constructed by the great man himself, that limits unannounced visits to near extinction. So when the chime rang like a fire alarm, I had a feeling breakfast was about to get indigestion. On the stoop stood a woman who looked like she had been rehearsing her entrance. Pale blue dress, a string of pearls at her throat, and the kind of self-composed tilt of the chin that told you she was used to people standing when she walked into a room. But the hands, those gave her away. They were clutching her handbag like she was waiting for someone to snatch it, knuckles white enough to blend with the pearls. "Mr. Goodwin?" she said. Her voice wasn't as steady as the chin. "Archie Goodwin in the flesh," I said. "And you're either selling encyclopedias or about to tell me something Mr. Wolfe won't want to hear until he's finished his eggs." She gave a quick glance over my shoulder, as though she half expected Wolfe to loom up behind me. I could have told her the odds of him leaving his chair during breakfast were the same as the sun rising in the west, but I let her have her fantasy. "My name is Caroline Vickery," she said, "and I must see Mr. Wolfe immediately." I gave her the once-over, politely but with professional interest. Caroline Vickery was no stranger to good tailoring and no friend to sleep. Her eyes had that glassy ring of someone who'd either cried too much or hadn't dared to yet. "Step inside," I told her. "But I warn you, if you keep him from the toast, you'll have only yourself to blame." She followed me to the office. Wolfe didn't even look up when I ushered her in, though I noticed he did keep his knife poised over the last piece of ham. That was a bigger concession than he'd ever admit. "Mr. Wolfe," I said, "this is Caroline Vickery. She insists she must see you now. I vote we charge her double for timing." Wolfe finally looked up, just his eyes, and the weight of that stare dropped the poor woman into the red leather chair like she'd been pushed. He dabbed his lips with his napkin. "Miss Vickery?" "Mrs.," she corrected softly. "Caroline Vickery. My husband died last year. Condolences," Wolfe muttered. It came out with the same intonation he used for "pass the salt." He set down the knife. "What compels you here?" She gripped the handbag tighter. "I've received an invitation to dinner. Tomorrow night, you require a detective to help you eat?" Wolfe asked, eyebrows lifting just enough to register surprise. "No," she swallowed. "The invitation is from my husband." That got him. The knife clinked against the plate as Wolfe leaned back in his chair, folding his hands on the arc of his stomach. He didn't speak right away, which was his way of showing interest. When Wolfe stayed quiet, it meant the wheels were turning. "You are certain," he said at last, "that your husband is dead?" She nodded once. "Buried. In Greenwood Cemetery, Brooklyn, March 23rd of last year. I was there. I leaned against my desk and crossed my arms. So either he dug himself out for the pleasure of steak and potatoes, or someone is trying to play a joke in remarkably poor taste." Her lips pressed together. "It's not a joke, Mr. Goodwin." The envelope was sealed with his crest. The handwriting is his, and... She opened her bag, reached in, and drew out a folded piece of thick cream stationery. She held it like it might bite. I took it, glanced at Wolfe, then opened it. The paper smelled faintly of tobacco. The message was short and written in a hand that had the steadiness of someone long practiced. Caroline, the table is set for one too many. Join me. 8 o'clock. Tomorrow, our home. Signed, Edward Vickery. I let out a low whistle. Wolfe stretched out a hand, and I placed the note in it. He examined it for a solid minute, nostrils flaring as if he were testing its scent. Finally, Wolfe looked up at Mrs. Vickery. "Madam, I dislike melodrama, but I detest forgery even more. You will leave the letter with me." She hesitated, then nodded. "You'll take the case?" Wolfe gave her a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have already." Wolfe didn't move for a full 30 seconds after he said he'd taken the case. In our line of work, silence is billable if it has his fingerprints on it. He stared at the card as if it had promised to bloom if he waited long enough. Caroline Vickery watched him like people watch a surgeon's eyebrows. I watched both and wondered what Fritz would say if I told him the morning beer had just earned its keep. "The crest," Wolfe said finally. "Describe it." "A stag rampant over a chevron," she said. "Edward had it on the club's menu covers and on his correspondence. He was fussy about seals." "Club?" I asked. "Our dining club," she said. "Vickery House. Edward founded it 6 years ago. Members by subscription, invitations for special evenings. He curated the table like a stage. Food, conversation, place cards, the wine's tempo. He said a dinner was a narrative and every guest had a part." "Pooh," Wolfe said, but not with full force. "Narratives should be read, not chewed." The stationery. "Custom, watermarked V and R. The seal is real wax, not the modern stuff." He used his signet ring. Wolfe's eyelids flattened. "Where is that ring now?" "Buried with him," she said. "He asked for it." I complied. I saw Wolfe's glance tilt to me. We both filed that one in a cabinet marked "Interesting." If the ring had sealed this, either someone had it, or someone wanted us to think they did. I put out a hand for the envelope. She produced it. Heavy stock, cream, a faint scent I knew but didn't place until I saw Wolfe's nostrils do their little connoisseur flutter. "Balkan mixture," he murmured. "Latakia forward." "Your husband smoked, Mrs. Vickery." "He pretended he had quit," she said. "He liked the ritual too much." I went to the phone and dialed the Gazette to catch Lon Cohen before lunch swallowed him. He answered on the second ring, all civic sunshine. I asked for an archive skim, obit on Edward Vickery, any follow-ups, and a note on Vickery House, membership partners, any trouble. Lon said he'd send a copy boy with clippings inside an hour if I promised Fritz's leftover popovers from last night. I told him I'd see what bribes the kitchen would tolerate and rang off. "Mrs. Vickery," Wolfe said, "what compels you to come to me and not, for example, the police?" She met it. What would I tell them? That a dead man wants me to eat soup? If it's a forgery, it's cruel. If it isn't, it's worse. Edward arranged things. He liked to prove a point with a plate, and he liked an audience. Someone is using that, using him to rattle me. I won't be rattled in my own home. "Where you still live?" I asked. "Yes," she said. "On Gramercy Park. The staff is reduced. We closed Vickery House after he died, but I kept the house." Her voice thinned. "I had one of the dining chairs reupholstered last week. Foolish, maybe. I wanted the room to feel less staged." "Who keeps keys besides you?" Wolfe asked. "The butler, Mr. Keene. He's been with the family 20 years. The housekeeper comes twice a week. Edward's brother has a key, but we've never—" She stopped. "Stephen and I are not on good terms." Name the living who might find it advantageous for you to be discomposed in public, Wolfe said. He sounded like a man ordering seed envelopes. Graham Lott, she said promptly. Edward's partner in the club. Talented palate, terrible temper. Lenore Kay, a patron who regarded Edward as a project. Marius Bell, the chef, brilliant, unstable. And Stephen. He resented everything Edward had. That will do, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin will verify your husband's burial and whether his ring is where you left it. He will also learn who had custody of your remaining stationery and seal. You will give him any keys he requires, and you will act as though nothing of consequence has occurred. Her eyes flicked to me. You want me to go to the dinner? Wolfe's mouth made a shape that wasn't agreement and wasn't not. We will consider that presently. The doorbell rang again. I don't startle easily, but the timing pulled a trick on my nerves. Fritz was back in the kitchen, so I left the office and took the hall in 3 steps. A kid in a cap stood on the stoop with a narrow parcel tied in black twine. For Mr. Wolfe, he said. From Mr. Cohen. He didn't wait for a tip, which told me Lon had prepaid with something indecent from our pantry. I carried it in. Wolfe reached without looking, slit the paper with a practiced nail, and tilted the contents onto his blotter. Under the Gazette clippings lay a smaller envelope addressed in the same tidy script as Caroline's letter. No stamp, no postmark. Hand-delivered. The crest winked at us in red wax. I looked at Wolfe. He looked at me. Caroline had gone still enough to qualify as furniture. Open it, he said. Inside was a single-place card, thick and cream, the kind that stays upright and announces how much the host cares whether you sit by the right candle. The name was written in a hand that matched the invitation, Nerowolfe. Folded with it was a diagram of a round table, 6 settings drawn with neat circles. Each little circle had a name. Caroline, Stephen, Graham, Lenore, Marius, and snug between Caroline and an empty space, Nero Wolfe. The table is set for 1 too many, I read. Somebody's arithmetic is ambitious. Wolfe's eyes had gone narrow, which Prudence says is not the moment to wave your arms. An intrusion, he said softly, into my house. Into my timetable. That diagram, I said, is either a joke with legs or someone who knows your feelings about leaving a chair. It is vulgar theatre, he said, and for a man who eats with the concentration of a monk, that was close to profanity. He lifted the place card as if it might be contagious, sniffed, and set it down. Same paper. Same ink. The wax is the same. Then the messenger knew where to find us, I said. Lon's boy brought this as wrapping. I skimmed the clippings and tucked them under my palm. If Cohen didn't send the small one, our ghost catered the delivery. Caroline found her voice. So now it isn't just me. No, Wolfe said. Now it is me. Which is worse for them. He drummed 2 fingers once on the desk. Not agitation, punctuation. I will not attend a grotesque masquerade. Mr. Goodwin will accompany you tomorrow evening as your escort. He turned his head a degree. You will arrive 10 minutes late. Shall I bring a cake with a file in it? I asked. You will bring your eyes and your memory, he said, and you will find where in that room the 7th chair is hidden. There are only 6 names, Caroline said faintly. Precisely, Wolfe said, yet the table is set for 1 too many. If the host is Mr. Vickery from beyond the grave, the extra is hubris. If the host is someone else, the extra is motive. He looked at me again. Call Greenwood. Confirm the interment and whether any disturbances of the grave have occurred. Speak to Mr. Keene at once and ask who laid the dining room last. Then call Mr. Panzer and ask whether, in the last week, a certain stationer has sold a box of V&R stock to anyone using cash. You don't know the stationer, I said. I will within the hour, he said, touching the watermark with a fingertip the size of a walnut. The fiber is Essex rag. The watermark is an affectation. The vendor will be an affectation also. Caroline Rose, unsteady but holding to her angle. I don't frighten easily, she said, and I believed her. But whoever sent that wants an audience. He'll get one. I want him to choke on it. Good, Wolfe murmured. Appetite will be the axis. Mrs. Vickery, Mr. Goodwin will see you to a cab. Do not speak of this to anyone, not on the diagram. Do not change your routine. She looked at the place card with his name, then at him. And you? Will you? I will dine here, he said, with decency. I got her to the door and watched the cab take her into the noon glare. When I came back, Wolfe was reading the clippings, lips pressed into the line that means a thought just parked and paid the meter. He passed me the top sheet. Edward Vickery, beloved impresario of the table, died at 49. Sudden cardiac failure at a charity tasting, mourned by wife Caroline, survived by brother Stephen. No autopsy by request of the family. Lon's notes? I asked. At the bottom, Wolfe said. Vickery house closed a month after. Lawsuit threats between Lot and the estate. Quietly settled. Chef Bell dismissed before the funeral. Rehired 2 weeks later, then gone. Miss Quay withdrew her patronage. He closed his eyes for a second, like he was measuring the weight of the names. When he opened them, the look they had would have chilled a pot roast. Archie, he said, we have been invited to a farce. Kindly see that I am amused. Only at the beginning I started my errands with the cemetery. Greenwood isn't in the business of encouraging ghosts, so the man on the phone was brisk. Yes, Edward Vickery was interred March 23rd of last year. Lot number, location, particulars, all neatly in the ledger. Any disturbances? None, he said. Grounds were inspected weekly. No digging, no tampering, no late-night seances. I asked about valuables, specifically a ring. He checked the burial record. Family had requested interment with personal effects, itemized as watch, ring, cufflinks, all sealed. No record of removal. That shut that door for now, though I marked it check lock again later. Next, I called Vickery's butler. Mr. Keene's voice had the polish of a man who'd announced dukes to dining rooms and had no plans to stop. When I explained who I was and that Mrs. Vickery had authorized my inquiries, he adjusted just enough to let me know he'd cooperate without liking it. Yes, he had set the dining table 2 days ago at Mrs. Vickery's request to air the room after the reupholstery. He had not sealed any envelopes. He had not delivered any invitations. He had not touched the stationery, which was locked in a desk drawer in Edward's old study. Mrs. Vickery had the key, and so far as he knew, no one else did. Someone had it, I said. Keene sniffed faintly over the line. Then they are a very quiet locksmith. That gave me pause. A man like Keene doesn't hand out compliments. If he said a break-in was discreet, it meant he hadn't seen a trace. Either the intruder was skilled, or Keene was playing dumb. I filed both possibilities. Then I dialed Saul Panzer. You don't give Saul details unless you want them spread. I told him to make discreet inquiries with local stationers about custom Essex rag stock with V&R watermark, any recent purchases by cash. He didn't ask why, just said he'd report when he had something. Saul's efficiency is the kind you can take to the bank or the morgue. That left the legwork only a Goodwin could do properly. Get a look at Vickery House and the faces behind those tidy names on the diagram. I called Mrs. Vickery, who was still at her Gramercy address, and asked her to expect me in an hour. She said she'd have Keene ready. The ride downtown gave me time to think. A dead man sending invitations is dramatic enough, but the way Wolfe reacted told me something else. He hated intrusion more than melodrama, and this was both. Whoever sent the place card with his name knew Wolfe's aversion to leaving his chair. That meant either someone inside the circle of suspects had studied him, or someone outside wanted to rattle him enough to send me scurrying. Either way, it was a lever, and levers are only useful if you've got a fulcrum. Gramercy Park looked the same as always. Polite trees, private iron fences, and houses that wore their respectability like starched collars. Vickery House had shutters closed against the afternoon glare, and a brass knocker polished within an inch of its life. Keene opened the door before my finger touched it, as if he had been watching through a slit in the curtains. He was tall, lean, and had the carriage of a man who could carry a tray across a battlefield without spilling a drop. He bowed me inside. The hallway smelled faintly of polish and something older, like the ghost of a feast cooked a year ago. "Mrs. Vickery will be down shortly," he said. "Would you like to see the dining room?" "I would," I told him. He led me through double doors into a chamber that looked like it had been designed by a man who thought meals should be sermons. Long table, heavy chairs, candelabras, and an expanse of carpet thick enough to trip a careless alibi. The reupholstered chair stood out in pale green amid the darker set, like a single fresh leaf on an old branch. "Mr. Vickery staged his dinners here," Keene said. His tone suggested reverence and weariness mixed in equal parts. He considered the arrangement sacred. "Who else had a key?" I asked, turning slowly. "Only Mrs. Vickery, Mr. Stephen, and myself. The housekeeper is let in when needed. She has never entered this room without my supervision. And you're sure the desk drawer with the stationery hasn't been touched?" He allowed himself a thin smile. I would notice. And I would not still be here if it had been. Before I could ask him who had the nerve to send invitations to the dead, Caroline entered. She wore a darker dress than in the morning, but the pearls remained. Her eyes looked less raw, though that might have been habit rather than recovery. "I thought you should see the table," she said. Edward always believed the table spoke before the guests did. "It told you whether you were honored or merely tolerated." I walked around, counted places, and bent close to the surface. A faint groove marred the wood where place cards had rested often enough to scar. The diagram had shown 6 names, but the table was built for 12. Whoever arranged the next performance would have room to spare. "Do you still use his seal?" I asked. She shook her head. I couldn't. It felt like forging him. I locked it away. "And the ring?" She stiffened. "It is with him." I let that pass and shifted to another point. "Tell me about Graham Lott." Her lips tightened. Edward admired him. Graham admired Edward's money. Their partnership ended badly. Threats of lawsuits, rumors of mismanagement. Graham fancied himself Edward's equal. He wasn't, and Stephen. My brother-in-law resented every inch of Edward's success. He thought Edward had stolen the family fortune. He still does Lenore Key, a widow who enjoyed attaching herself to brilliance. She tried to make Edward her project. He let her for a while, and Marius Bell. Her eyes flicked. Genius in the kitchen, dangerous outside it. He was dismissed, rehired, dismissed again. Edward said he had a palate worth indulging and a temper worth avoiding. That gave me the flavor of the suspects, but not the recipe. I nodded toward the reupholstered chair. "Why change that one?" She hesitated. It was his chair. He sat there for every dinner. I wanted it to look less like a throne Keene's. Mouth moved like he wanted to object, but thought better of it. I thanked her and said I'd be in touch before the dinner tomorrow. On my way out, I noticed something odd. A faint scuff near the door frame, too high for shoes, too shallow for furniture. When I asked Keene, he said it must have been from moving the chair, but I've moved enough furniture to know the difference between a chair leg and a gloved hand brushing against wood. Outside, the late sun made Gramercy's windows shine like coins. I hailed a cab and headed back uptown. Wolfe would be waiting, fat and immovable, hungry for facts the way other men are hungry for dessert. I had suspects with motives, a ghost with a pen, and a table that had once belonged to a man who believed dinners were plays. Someone wanted Act 1 to start tomorrow night. And if Wolfe had his way, the curtain would come down before anyone left their seat. I hit the stoop at 4:30 and let myself in with the key that has kept more riffraff out of Wolfe's routine than a squad car. The house had that quiet, I know. Fritz in the kitchen, Wolfe in the office pretending the world doesn't exist unless it knocks twice. I knocked twice and went in. He was in the chair, the diagram on his lap like a placemat he refused to set. I gave him the symmetry, clean and dull, interment confirmed, effects sealed, no disturbances. He grunted as if someone had tried to sell him margarine. I gave him keen, table aired, desk drawer locked, stationer stock in the study, no envelope sealed or delivered by staff. Another grunt, heavier. Then the room in its cast, the reupholstered throne, the smell of old feasts, the suspects as outlined by a widow who knew exactly where to cut. When I got to the faint scuff high on the dining room doorframe, he opened one eye. Describe it. Half moon, low pressure, height, about shoulder for a tall man, too shallow for furniture, too high for shoes. Wrong angle for a tray. He closed the eye again. A gloved thumb lifted for balance while the hand reached above it. For what? Transom latch, I said, or a picture rail. Or one of those discreet bells to announce late arrivals. He let the sound hang. If they have fitted the room for cues, the theatre is not a haphazard one. The phone interrupted with the spare manners of our line. I took it. Saul didn't bother with hello. 2 shops in Manhattan carry Essex rag in that weight with novelty watermarks, he said. Hilliard and Sons on Madison, Piper Gray on West 45th. Hilliard sold a ream for cash 8 days ago. Buyer wore gloves, asked no engraving, took a stick of red wax. Clerk remembers a trace of heavy latakia when he leaned in. Piper Gray hasn't moved any in months. I'll get you a face when I can. If there's a signet involved, it wasn't ordered recently through either. I told him to keep pulling and hung up. Wolfe's lip made its little half-inch move. They scorn convenience, he said. Either they have a ring or they have a counterfeit cast already. If they had Edward's ring, it would have required a shovel or a favor at a mortuary, I said. I don't like either. It is possible to take a readable impression from old wax, he said. Vulgar, but common enough among people who care more for effect than for craft. He shook the table diagram once, like he was trying to rattle a crumb loose. Report, Mr. Keene's tone. Cooperative with starch. Protective of the room. He called any intruder a quiet locksmith. That is either pride or confession, Wolfe said, or both. Before I could give an opinion, Fritz filled the doorway with the kind of indignation he saves for crimes against cuisine. Herr Wolfe, he said, the thermostat in the North Orchid room has been turned down 3 degrees. You could have told him the Pope had eloped and got less effect. Wolfe's shoulders lifted a 1/4 inch and dropped. When? I checked at 4, Fritz said. It was correct at 11. I'd not altered it. The door was latched as I left it. Wolfe turned his head to me slowly, as if the muscles were weighing the worth of motion. We have had a trespass, he said. Subtle enough to flatter itself, stupid enough to be smelled. He pushed with his fingertips on the chair's arms and did not rise. Attend to the doors and windows. And the service entrance. Whoever touched my plants did not come down the chimney. I did a circuit. Front and back locks were intact. Window catches set. But at the service door off the kitchen, the paint on the hasp had a fresh scar, a clean nick where a tool had kissed it. Not a pry. More of a test, as if a hand wanted to know the bite before committing. I called Wolfe from the hall. He didn't come, naturally. I brought the news in. Fritz, he said, until further notice, do not leave the kitchen door unattended, even for beer. The next hand that touches my orchids will lose a finger in imagination, if not in fact. To me, our guest's resources include reconnaissance and the elementary discipline to avoid gross traces. He wanted to see if our house is as sacrosanct as mine. He has learned that it is not, or he wanted us to learn it isn't, I said. You could read that scar as a stage whisper. Both can be true, Wolfe said. He set the diagram aside and tapped a finger on the invitation Caroline had left. Our antagonist plays with appetite and protocol. He tampers with the ritual of dining and with mine. Very well. We will require counter-ritual. He shut his eyes. At dinner tomorrow, you will sit where you can see the door and the sideboard. The seventh chair is either literal and hidden or metaphorical and offensive. Your task is to find both, I told him about the reupholstered chair being Edward's old throne. His mouth flattened. A woman's grief rearranges, alters, he said, almost gently. Men resent the change because they worship the idol, not the right. He opened his eyes. The scuff suggests a reach above the door. If there is a bell wire, follow it. If there is a latch left ajar, close it. If there is a place card not on the diagram, put it in your pocket. And the suspects? I asked. Any preference for dessert first? Mr. Lott will simmer, Miss Quay will over-season her sentences, Mr. Bell, if present, will be in love with himself, and Mr. Stephen Vickery will hate upon principle. Choose the one who treats silence as if it ought to applaud him. That will be our host. He flicked 2 fingers toward the phone. Call Mr. Keene. Instruct him that Mrs. Vickery will arrive precisely at 10 minutes after 8 with a companion. Tell him the house is not to be open to any tradesman, press, or messenger between now and then. I dialed. Keene took it like an order he had already written on a list. He agreed with a crisp, "Very good, sir," that carried a frost warning. When I hung up, the phone rang again. I took it, expecting Saul. It wasn't. The voice on the line was a man's mid-range, trained to be pleasant the way a maitre d' learns how to smile with only his teeth. Mr. Goodwin, he said, tomorrow's menu has been amended. Kindly tell Mrs. Vickery that grains of paradise have replaced black pepper. It is more authentic, I let a beat pass. And you are? A friend of the house, he said, and I swear I could hear the shape of the room he was standing in. High ceilings, soft walls, the faint ring that says expensive and empty. You were right about arriving late. Don't be later than 10. The click was clean. I looked at Wolfe. Our ghost has opinions on seasoning. Of course he does, Wolfe said. He's a man who thinks history is the same as taste. Grains of paradise, he repeated, and his tone made a spice sound like a diagnosis. Fritz? Fritz had not left. Yes, Herr Wolfe. Did you move your jar of Aframamum? No, Fritz said. It sits in the second row, right of the mace. Why? Because a man who telephones to announce his authenticity has already been to check his terms, Wolfe said. Mr. Goodwin, verify. I went to the rack. The jar was where Fritz said, but the lid was misaligned by a notch. Nothing, unless you live with a cook who centers his lids like a sniper centers a scope. I loosened it, sniffed, and brought the jar back. Opened and closed by a hand that doesn't care if it squeaks, I said. Latakia from the paper and grains of paradise from our kitchen. He's building a perfume Wolfe's eyes had gone to slits. He wants us to know what he knows, he said, and he wants me to come. He brushed the place card with a knuckle as if it had just insulted him in public. He shall not have me. He shall have you. I always bring good table. Manners, I said. You will bring them sharpened, he said. If he has arranged his theatre as meticulously as I suspect, he cannot resist drawing the curtain in his own time. Let him. But watch his hands when he thinks you are watching his mouth. He leaned back and exhaled, not tired, measuring. Tomorrow, Archie, the table will speak first. Make sure it says something foolish. The next evening I put on a suit that didn't squeak and a tie Wolfe would approve of only because he hadn't chosen it. At 7:45 I was on Gramercy's stoop. where Caroline Vickery stood waiting like someone who'd forgotten whether to look defiant or scared and settled for both. She wore black, not mourning but defiance, pearls again, and gloves that gripped the handle of her bag like it contained more than lipstick. "You're punctual," she said. "I'm a trained man," I told her. "When a ghost sends me a dinner invite, I don't want to be late for the soup course." Inside, Keene met us with the gravity of a man ushering in his own execution. The dining room gleamed. Candelabras lit, silver set, chairs pulled at perfect angles, the table polished enough to blind an amateur. At the head was the reupholstered chair, pale green like a spotlight. The place cards sat folded at each setting, the names in Edward Vickery's unmistakable hand. Caroline, Stephen, Graham, Lenore, Marius, and mine, snug between Caroline and the empty chair. I bent close. Ink still smelled fresh. "Who set these?" I asked Keene. "They were here when I entered at 6, he said stiffly. "I laid the cutlery, the glassware." The cards were already placed. Caroline's eyes flicked at me. "And you saw no one?" "No one." He gave it the weight of a vow. The clock struck 8. The front doorbell chimed almost on its heels. Keene disappeared and returned with the first guest, Stephen Vickery. If Edward had been the impresario, Stephen looked like the man who had been asked to fetch the coats. Lean, sharp-featured, dressed well enough, but not comfortably. He entered with a sourness that filled the room before his words did. "Caroline," he said, "I didn't expect you'd indulge this circus. Nor did I expect you'd accept an invitation written by your brother's hand," she said evenly. Stephen's eyes cut to me. "And this?" "Escort," she said, "approved by Nero Wolfe." That made him blink. The name still carried weight. He looked at me like I was a card he hadn't known was in the deck. The bell rang again. Graham Lott entered, heavy-set, florid, the kind of man who lived well and wanted you to know it. His suit strained at the buttons. His smile did too. He greeted Caroline with too much warmth, Stephen with too little, and me with none at all. "This is indecent," he declared, surveying the table. "Edward's hand, or some impudent thief's, dragging us back here like trained seals." He eyed the eyed-up chair at the head. "If this is a joke, I'm not amused." Lenore Key arrived next. Tall, elegant, with a deliberate languor, as though she had been rehearsing her entrance for months. She kissed Caroline's cheek, glanced at Stephen like he was wallpaper, and laid her gloves beside her plate with theatrical care. Marius Bell followed, smaller than I'd expected, compact, dark-eyed, with the twitch of a man whose temper lived close to the surface. He sniffed the air as though already judging the menu. "If this is Edward's recipe," he said, "then someone has botched the proportions." 5 guests, 6 names on the diagram, plus Wolfe's card. The room was complete except for the chair at the head. Keene brought soup, a pale broth with floating herbs that smelled faintly of something too exotic for comfort. He placed it silently, bowing just enough. None of the guests touched their spoons at first. They stared at the head chair as though it might seat itself. Then Stephen snorted. "Enough. My brother is dead, and whoever apes his hand will not keep me from a meal." He lifted his spoon. The others followed, reluctantly, glances darting to the door, to the table, to each other. I kept my spoon untouched. My job wasn't appetite. It was eyes. Halfway through the course, Lenore gave a little gasp. She had unfolded her napkin, and inside it lay a card. Not a place card, an envelope, cream stock, sealed in red wax. Her hand shook as she broke it. She read aloud in a voice that had suddenly gone flat. "One of you has lied already. The table knows." Silence hit like a dropped dish. Graham's face purpled. "Lied? About what?" Marius sneered. "We're here, aren't we? If anyone lied, it was you, Graham, when you swore you never touched the accounts." Stephen slammed his spoon down. Edward isn't here to accuse me, so don't think you can put his words in your mouth. Caroline's hand tightened on her spoon, but she kept her eyes on me. She didn't speak. The soup went cold. No one touched it again. Keen cleared with silent efficiency and brought the next course. Fish glazed in a sauce that smelled faintly peppery. Grains of paradise. I tasted nothing, but Wolfe's warning rang clear in my head. Watch the hands, not the mouths. And that's when I saw it. Graham, in the act of reaching for his glass, palmed something from beneath his place card. A slip of folded paper, smaller than an envelope. He slid it under his cuff with the clumsy secrecy of a man out of practice. I made no move. Not yet. But I filed it where Wolfe would want it, a mark against Graham Lott, amateur magician with bad sleeves. The clock struck 9. The candles guttered slightly, though there was no draught. And then, as if timed with a stroke, the bell chimed again. Keene hesitated, glanced at Caroline, and went to the hall. The guests froze, half risen from their chairs. A murmur of voices, then footsteps. Keene returned, face pale, and behind him came a figure none of us had expected. Tall, broad, wrapped in a dark coat despite the warmth. The man moved with slow certainty. His hair was white, his eyes sharp, and his hand rested on the back of the pale green chair. Caroline gasped. Stephen swore. Graham made a sound between a laugh and a choke. The man sat down. "Good evening," he said. "I trust you've saved me a place." And the voice was Edward Vickery's. Caroline's knuckles whitened on the stem of her glass. Stephen half rose like a man told his mortgage had sprouted legs. Lenore's hand went to her pearls, which was either sincerity or choreography. Graham's mouth tightened as if he'd bitten peppercorns whole. Marius smiled the way a small carnivore smiles when the cage door swings. I didn't move. Wolfe had told me to watch the hands, and the man's hands were good. Broad, well-kept, a faint tan line where a ring might live, and a smoothness at the knuckles you don't get from kneading dough or balancing ledgers. He rested them lightly on the table's edge as if the wood were a pet. "Edward," Caroline said, and her voice put the word on trial. "If this is an obscenity—" "It would be," he said, "if it were not me." The tone was easy, deep, and carried that self-assurance you hear from men who have never needed to raise their voices to be obeyed. "Caroline, forgive the theatrics. I wanted the table to speak." "First," Stephen laughed once. "Ugly. Ghosts don't get forgiven. They get exorcised. Take off your mask." "No mask," the man said, amused, "though I admit a year underground does change one's complexion." He reached for the fish. The fork was in his left hand, the knife in the right. The knife did the work. He cut like a man who had rehearsed his angles. I watched Caroline watching his hands, and saw the tiniest flinch. Something that said a memory had stubbed its toe. Marius sniffed. "The sauce is wrong." "Grains of paradise," the man said without looking at him. "Black pepper is vulgar here." You know that Marius's eyes narrowed, not because he'd been corrected, but because he had been anticipated. "If you are who you say, you'd know more than pantry tricks." The man smiled slightly and lifted his glass. "Here's to pantry tricks, then. They keep the stage set." He drank, and when he set the glass down, his cuff pulled back just enough to show a flash of seal gold. Lenore leaned forward, breathless. "Your ring," she whispered. He obligingly lifted his hand. The signet was square, heavy, red gold, the stag rampant and the chevron crisp. He turned it so the crest faced outward on his little finger. Caroline made a sound that could have been a sob or a curse. Stephen went pale, and then grey. "That ring," Stephen said hoarsely, "was buried with you." "So it was," the man agreed pleasantly. "And then it wasn't." I would have liked a stagehand to wheel in a drum for effect. But he didn't need percussion. He lifted a small blank card from beside his plate, took a stick of red wax from his pocket, and warmed it over the nearest candle with patience that said, either this had been planned, or he enjoyed taking his time. The room watched the bead form, drip and puddle. He pressed the ring down with care, rotated it a hair, too practiced, not first-timer clumsy, and lifted. The crest stood in the wax, clean and proud. Graham leaned in so close his breath fogged the gloss. "Well," he said, and the word came out like a bill. "There it is. Can we eat now?" "By all means," the man said. "Eat. Then we'll talk. I didn't touch my fish." While Keene took in the next course cue with a glance, I slid an eye along the line of the tablecloth, the edge of the carpet, the baseboard. A wire as thin as a jealous thought disappeared under the head chair's front leg and ran beneath the cloth toward the wall. It wasn't part of the lighting. The candelabras were freestanding. I let my right shoe nudge the leg. A faint give. A bell pull underfoot then, as on a contact. Keene's timing at the door, the candle flutter at 9. It wasn't all atmosphere. It was cues. The man ate sparingly, with appreciation and without greed. When he placed his knife and fork together, Keene appeared. That could be habit. Long servants learn their masters. But Keene's eyes weren't the eyes of a man obeying an old rhythm. They were watching for a signal he didn't want me to see. Lenore found her voice again and deployed it like silk. "Edward, darling," she said, pouring charm like wine, "if this is real, you owe us an explanation." "I owe no one explanations," he said mildly, "but I will pay you one." Later he turned his head, taking in the circle. "For now, let us inventory our appetites. Graham, still hungry for the accounts? Stephen, for the house? Marius, for a kitchen that will forgive you? Lenore, for a project? Caroline?" He paused just long enough to cut the word in two. "For peace?" Graham's chair creaked. "Don't start," he warned, cheeks working. "We all came because you dragged us. If you want something, say it. I have," the man said, gesturing to the table. "I want you here. I want you to remember how to behave." He looked at the place cards, then touched the empty one beside Carolyn and mine. And I wanted one more. But he is too wise to leave his chair. He knew Wolfe hadn't come. That wasn't magic. My name at the table instead of Wolfe's was information if you were a man who acquired information. Still, the way he said it, without irritation, almost with respect, gave me a twinge. Either I was up against a good actor with a good study, or the dead had been keeping up with the living. Keene brought a roast that had more authority than some mayors. The aroma lifted the room a little. Conversation didn't. Everyone had sorted themselves into the same positions they'd likely held a year ago. But time had made those postures stiff. Caroline watched without blinking. Stephen drank. Graham sweated. Lenore arranged her features into compassion. Marius's jealousy sweated through his pores, which is a talent. I tried a small experiment. "Mr. Vickery," I said, "your club's cellar. You had a fondness for a 28 Barolo from Giacosa." He looked at me, amused. I had a fondness for the performance people made of pretending to know their Barolo. But yes, Giacosa's 28 had a structure that frightened away the ignorant. "Then you'll be pleased," I said, nodding at the bottle on the sideboard Keene had just opened. The label matched. The cork beside it was stained blacker than wine would allow. Latakia had a way of making its introductions everywhere. Keene saw where my eyes went and moved the cork without looking like he was moving it. I filed that under hands. Midway through the roast, a small commotion began under the cloth at Graham's end. He jerked his knees back, cursed, and fished. A folded slip had appeared exactly where his lap met linen. He palmed it fast, but not faster than my eyes. He read it, and fat doesn't blanch, but it tried. He stuffed it in his pocket and cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he muttered. "Powder room." "Later," the man at the head said. It wasn't loud, but it had steel. Graham sat back down like the chair had tugged him. "Edward," Caroline said quietly, and the quiet did more than shouting would have, "you died at a charity tasting in March. There was a service. There was a grave. If you are you, why?" "Because," he said, "someone wanted a story to end. I dislike poor endings. That was the truth or a rehearsal of it." He turned to Stephen. "Little brother." Stephen flinched. "Don't call me that." "You were," the man said. "Ah, still hungry. What did you tell the lawyer the week after I was put in the ground? That the club would fail without me, and so the house should be sold to cover the debts, or that Caroline couldn't manage the property alone?" Stephen's mouth opened and closed. He went for righteous. "I told him the truth." "Which is what?" the man asked, smiling. "That I wouldn't let Graham steal it." He turned on Graham so fast the air twitched. "Tell him what you took." Graham bristled, hand going unconsciously to the pocket where the note sat like a hot potato. "I took nothing that wasn't agreed to." "Ah," the man said. "Agreements." "Marius, what do you agree to? Temper, knife, liquor?" Marius met it with a cold flare. "I agree that if this is a game, I won't play nursery." "Good," the man said. "Nurseries are for children. This is supper." He gestured. Keene blinked and removed plates that had barely been touched, then returned with a silver salver holding 5 small envelopes. He laid one at each setting. Names on them, neat as the rest. I watched Keene's hands. There was the slightest tremor, so slight you could excuse it as candle draft. I didn't. "Open them," the man said. "Read them to yourselves." I didn't touch mine. Across the table, Caroline slid a fingernail under wax. Lenore delicately broke hers. Stephen jammed a thumb through. Graham fumbled. Marius slit his with a knife like he was carving flesh. Eyes moved. Faces moved more. Lenore went pale. Stephen flushed. Marius's jaw clicked. Caroline's lips thinned until they nearly disappeared. Graham laughed once, short and savage, like a dog startled by its reflection. "Truths," the man said. "Small ones. We'll have larger courses." Later, I tilted my card and caught a single word before I slid it back under my plate. Unbroken. Observer. If he'd written me a role, he thought he knew my script. Maybe he did. I could let him think so until he took his bow. The clock started up to 10, each stroke stretched by the room's breath. Candlelight makes liars of faces and friends of shadows. I shifted my chair an inch, felt the wire under the head chair tighten and sing, and filed that for Wolfe with a red tag. The man glanced down, not at my feet, but at his. Habit. He had trained himself to keep time with his own cues. "Dessert," he said, and smiled at Caroline. "Your favorite? Or have you changed?" "I've changed," she said. "Not favorites." Scale's delight flickered, genuine or well lit. "Good. I was always told growth was unbecoming." "It is," she said, "to those who don't have it." Keene brought in a bomb that looked like it had been engineered by a civil servant with feelings. As he circled, a thin ribbon of smoke lifted from a wick hidden in the centerpiece and braided with the candlelight. Not from wax, from something sharper. I lifted my head. Latakia again, faint and mocking, curling through the room like a signature that hadn't needed to be written but had been anyway. He wanted us to know he knew. He wanted me to carry that smell back to Wolfe and lay it on the blotter like a calling card. I finished not eating dessert, and when I set my spoon down, I let it tap twice, soft against the plate. The man's eyes flicked, the tiniest jerk, to the head chair's foot, a dancer hearing his cue. All right, I thought. Curtain up. I let the spoon's tap ring the way a prompter clears his throat, and watched the man at the head chair hear it. His eyes didn't move. His foot did. an inch of pressure on the leg where the wire kissed the rug. From the pantry door came the softest of sounds, metal on felt, the kind that means a man with a tray has tightened his grip. Keene stepped in, not looking at anyone, and trimmed a candle that didn't need trimming. The room accepted the lie like good society accepts a bore. "Since we're all awake," the man said, smiling, "let's not waste the sweet course on silence." He reached to the centerpiece and, with a neat flick of a fingernail, snapped the hidden wick shorter. The smoke thinned. "We will speak truths. Small ones now, larger ones later." Graham flinched like he'd been named by a bailiff. "You will put back what you took," the man said. "You will do it elegantly so the papers won't sniff." Graham's jaw worked. "If there were anything to put back," he said carefully, "I would have already." The man said, not buying and not bothered. "Marius, you will apologize to the boy you struck on the loading dock and pay him a year's wages. And you will enroll in a school where they teach cooks to count to 10. Marius's smile showed small teeth. "You always like to season with humiliation?" "It brings out the flavor," the man said. "Stephen—" "No," Stephen snapped, the word coming from somewhere knotted. "You don't get to call me anything." "Very well," the man said. "Mr. Vickery, you will stop writing to the lawyer. If you wish to fight for the house, do it in the light." Lenore breathed like a lesson. "And me, Edward. Must I give up my projects?" "You must pick one," he said, amused. "You collect men like shells." She colored. For once it looked unpracticed. "Perhaps I will start with you." "Or finish," he murmured, and the room had to cough to clear it. While he was busy being or not being a resurrection, I went to work with what Wolfe had sent me with. My feet and my eyes. The wire under the head chair had slack like a garter and tension like a promise. I lifted my knee under the tablecloth and let the toe of my shoe find the leg. A careful press. From the pantry I got, right on cue, the low chime you hear in good kitchens when timing matters. Not a bell, a bar, soft metal tapped by a felted arm. Keene appeared again, too soon to be natural, with a plate of sugared fruits that nobody had asked for. "Apologies," he said. "I misunderstood the tempo." "On the contrary," the man said pleasantly. "You're a metronome." He didn't so much as twitch at the wire I'd played like a harp. I dropped my napkin. Not clumsy. Practiced. I went to retrieve it and let my hand skim the underside of the cloth. A second line ran not to the head chair but forward along the table's skeleton to the patch of rug in front of Graham. It ended at a small brass nub the size of a shirt button nailed to the wood where a knee would live. Graham's hand twitched when my knuckle brushed it. He knew it was there. He'd already pressed it once tonight, when his lap had sprouted a message that had tried to drag him to the powder room. I got my napkin and came up with an apologetic smile for the table at large. No one apologized back. The man had taken a fresh blank card, warmed wax, and sealed another crest for the pleasure of it. I reached, admiring, and he let me. The wax bore the stag clean and smug. When I reversed the card, a faint glitter caught the light. Red gold dust ground into the fibers where the seal had been lifted a shade too late. The edges of the impression were too perfect for a ring worn daily. They lived in the clean, cold neighborhood where a jeweler's last file still whispers. If the ring had been in the ground a year, it hadn't been practicing. "Lovely," I said, and slid the card back toward him with 2 fingers, except clumsiness happens, even to trained men. The card half skidded, brushed my plate, and with a little apology to propriety, ended under it. I righted things, but the card did not reappear. I am not a magician, but I have pockets, and a man who builds a theater should expect a souvenir thief in the cheap seats. He lifted his glass again. "A toast," he said, to nobody in particular, and to everyone. To second chances. No, Caroline said. The word wasn't loud, but it straightened spines. To endings that finish, not that begin again out of vanity. He watched her, and something, real or superbly cast, moved in his face. I always underestimated you, he said softly. Forgive me that. You never underestimated anyone, she said. You weighed us. Then let me weigh this, he replied, and he raised his glass higher. To the table that teaches. Glasses went up because muscles do what custom tells them to. I let mine hover and measured the room. Lenore was watching the man's mouth. Stephen was watching the ring. Marius was watching the knife at his own setting, as if considering the proofs a blade can make. Graham was watching the door. The door obliged. A knock, triple, neat, more signal than request. Keane froze. The man at the head smiled like an actor whose cue has landed. Right on the line, he said. Keane. Caroline's voice was steel, wrapped in silk. No, we are not open to tradesmen, press, or messengers tonight. We are open to no one. Stephen put in, sudden authority for once in his voice. Keane, if you... It's all right, the man said gently, and his foot did the small press on the wire that made servants arrive. It's for me. Keane went. He was gone long enough to make the air lean. He returned with a silver tray and a small parcel on it, narrow, wrapped in brown paper, tied with black twine. It looked exactly like the bundle Lon Cohen's boy had brought to our door, except the handwriting on the label was not Lon's, unless Lon had taken a sabbatical to a finishing school. For Mr. Vickery, Keane said. The man did not hurry. The string came loose under a thumb that liked ropes. He unfolded brown paper with a neatness that would have made a coroner jealous and lifted the lid on a long, slim box. Inside lay a knife, table size, antique, bone-handled, and a folded scrap of cream. He read the scrap, smiled privately, and set it down where we could all see. Use the right tool. Marius laughed once, delighted despite himself. Whoever's writing your lines, he has taste. Whoever's writing my life, he does too, the man said pleasantly, and he touched the knife's spine like you touch a pet. He didn't cut anything. He didn't need to. I excused myself, not out loud, there are ways. I rose when Keane moved behind me so that his tray hid me from the head of the table for 2 beats. I made for the hall as if I'd gotten the powder room signal on my own knee. No one stopped me. In the quiet beyond the dining room, the house breathed in the old bones of the banister and the rugs. A light showed under the study's door. The desk where the stationery lived was a thing with too many drawers for decency. The lock on the right-hand one had been replaced recently. New brass, unscarred. The lacquer around it had a faint crescent scuff at shoulder height, the kind a gloved thumb leaves when you steady yourself to reach up to a transom latch that hasn't been opened in years. The drawer itself, when I tried it, resisted just long enough to make me think about virtue and then gave. Inside, cream stock stamped V and R, a stick of red wax with the wick already used, and a crumpled paper bag that had been shoved down and then reconsidered. Hilliard and Sons, Madison Avenue, in tasteful ink. Saul's voice said hello in my ear, without the telephone. I let the bag fold small and find my pocket. I left the box of paper like a hunter leaves feed. On the way out, I paused at the base of the stairs. The basement door had a new scratch at the keyhole. Below, the dark held that particular breath you only get from rooms where men have practiced without being watched. I didn't go down. I was dressed for dinner, not spelunking. But I marked the door with my thumbnail on the jamb where a man who was watching his mouth wouldn't look. Back at the table, I arrived at the end of a silence that had tried to be conversation and failed. The man glanced up, calculated that my exit had been a bathroom and not a reconnaissance, and gave me the nod you give a waiter who found the right spoon. He set the knife down with care, and then, with the same care, turned his ring so the crest faced inward. It's a habit some men have when they're about to hit something or someone and don't want to stamp it. He didn't hit anyone. He hit the wire with his foot. The bar in the pantry chimed. A door, not the front, opened and closed somewhere deep. Keene did not move. Whoever had come or gone had their own key. The man's eyes flicked to Graham. Graham's hand went to his pocket, where the first note had disappeared. For a second, the room showed its bones. A stage with a trapdoor, a conductor with a hidden baton, an audience that had started to suspect the orchestra was miming. "Thank you," the man said into the room, and the room, being well-bred, didn't answer. He rose. It was a good rise. No wobble, no debt to the chair, but the wire underfoot sang when he lifted. And that was the note I wanted. I set my glass down and let the stem sing back a fraction, a mimicry he heard or felt. His eyes came to me, amused. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "tell Mr. Wolfe it would have been an honor." "I will," I said. "He likes to know when he's been honored." "Ah," he said, and for the first time all night something like annoyance wrinkled the voice. "He likes to know too much." "That's how he eats," I said. He laughed, not kindly. "Then let him dine." He nodded to Carolyn, inclined his head to the table, and started toward the door. No one tried to stop him. They watched in the way people watch a hearse. They make room for it because they don't know what else to do. At the threshold he paused and looked back, not at Caroline, but at the pale green chair. "Do not reupholster the rest," he said softly. "They have learned your shape." He left. The front door opened and shut with the soft courtesy of money. The wire under the headchair relaxed. For 3 seconds the room was stone. Then everyone started talking at once, the way a dam lets go. I let them. I had a card sweating in my pocket with a red stag's face on it, a paper bag that said Hilliard, wax on my fingers that would make Fritz frown, and a wire in my shoe that had hummed like a fishing line. I had enough to bring Wolfe a smell and a string. I helped Caroline stand because the room had lost its weight for her. She didn't lean. "You saw," she said. "I saw a man who knows where to put his feet," I said. "Tomorrow we'll ask Mr. Wolfe where to put ours." I got Caroline into a cab and let the night take her as gently as it was going to. Gramercy looked like it always does when money is tired. Polite, lit, and unwilling to admit it heard anything. I headed uptown with my pockets warm, one card with a fresh stag pressed into red, one tasteful bag that said Hilliard and Sons, and a ghost of Latakia trying to live in my lapel. Wolfe hates taxis. They move him without his permission. They move me fine. I had 10 blocks to sort what I'd feed him first. Fritz let me in with an eyebrow that could skewer a ham. I followed the beer smell to the office. Wolfe had not, as promised, gone anywhere. He was lodged exactly where civilization expects him to be at 10:15. In the chair, a book open but unread. The place card with his name on the blotter like something he had decided not to burn. He took one look at my face and closed the book on a forefinger. "Report." "Edward Vickery attended his own dinner," I said. "He has better posture than most revenants." He didn't blink. "Describe." I did a lap of the room with my tongue. The wire under the head chair, tuned to bring Keene with a bar chime from the pantry. A second contact under the table at Graham's knee that sneezed notes into his lap when pressed. The smoke thread, Latakia, braided into the centerpiece wick. The Barolo uncorked alongside a cork that had known tobacco, before wine. The knife in the box with a note that read, "Use the right tool." The ring, square, red gold, stag rampant, chevron, pressed into wax twice with the competence of a man who has been patient too long. The hand that turned the ring inward before walking, like a bruiser remembering his manners. The parcel's twine, black, matched to the bundle Lonsboy had carted to our door. Keen's tremor, Graham's pocketed note, Stephen's bile, Lenore's performance, Marius's appetite for a fight, the basement door scratch, the study drawer with a new lock, and this. I put the tasteful bag on the blotter like a cat leaves its trophy. Wolfe touched the paper with a finger that knew good rag when it met it, then the Hilliard bag, then the card I slid after it. A fresh wax crest stamped 10 feet from a man who might be dead and might be an actor begging for reviews. He brought the card to his nose, and the Latakia hopped up like a spaniel. He set it down, leaned back, and shut his eyes. "Saul," he said. It wasn't a question, but I answered. 2 shops, Hilliard and Piper Gray. Hilliard sold a ream for cash 8 days ago, along with red wax. Buyer wore gloves. Clerk smelled heavy Latakia. "Saul will fish a face. Jeweler," Wolfe said. A signet newly cut or recut in the past month with a stag rampant over chevron, not the ring in Mr. Vickery's grave. "Greenwood swears the ring went into the ground," I said. "No disturbances." "Bah," Wolfe said. "If they had opened it artlessly, it would have been seen." There are subtler ways than shovels when one needs a crest. A ring may be cast from an impression. A new ring may be cut from a design. The impression here, he tapped the wax, is too clean. A ring worn daily carries scars. The wax records them. Your card does not. The bevel is virginal. The edges are not eroded by habit. His eyes opened. Our Edward is an affectation skilled in affectations. He knew a lot, I said. Grain's a paradise for the fish. Barolo label right. He handled the knife, the cues, the timing. He had Keen tuned like a piano. Keen, Wolfe said, rolling the syllable in butter. A loyalist or a conscript? His hands shook when he laid the envelopes, I said, but not when he trimmed candles that didn't need trimming. He answered the pantry bar like he had learned a new religion and was trying not to look converted. Will he lie to us? Wolfe asked. He'll lie to himself first and see if he likes the taste, I said. If not, he'll try it on us. The phone rang. I took it. Saul, with his usual bedtime story voice. Hilliard's boy remembered the buyer's hair too white for his hands, he said. Left-handed with the pen, right-handed with cash. Accent clean midtown. Walked with a softness. Says he could tap a man's shoulder in a crowd, and the man would assume it was air. Also, he asked whether Hilliard kept sealing, rings in the case. Clark said no. Buyer said, pity. You want me on jewelers for fresh signets with stags? I'll spread a net spread, I said. Add engravers who recut heirlooms from photographs. And anyone who bought red gold blanks. Saul said. If he made it on 26th Street off a wax, they'll be filing somewhere. He hung up to go smell the city. Good, Wolfe said. What about Graham? He pocketed something under his card. Later, he fished a second note out of his lap, courtesy of the knee button. He tried to leave. Our host told him no. Either Graham's been siphoning from accounts, or somebody wants him to think the table knows it. He watched the door like it owed him money. Stephen? Weekly letters to the lawyer about selling the house, I said. He hates on instinct. If he's helping the show, the motive is to frighten Caroline into a sale or a mistake. And Miss Quay. She would like the role of widow's mentor with benefits. She watched the host's mouth. If she knows who he is, she knows it from rehearsals. Marius? Ready to explode, I said. He liked the knife like a dog likes a stick. If he's in for sport. If he's out, he's still dangerous. Mr. Keen? Knows the cues and the wires. Trembled at the envelopes. He announced the parcel with too much neutrality. Someone used either his loyalty or his dread to lay the room. Wolfe nodded once, heavy as a seal. We will relieve him of the burden of choosing. He opened a drawer, took out a stack of our cards, heavy cream, discreet type, and slid one to me. You will invite them all tomorrow at 11. Mrs. Vickery, Mr. Stephen Vickery, Mr. Lott, Miss Quay, Mr. Bell, and Mr. Keene. The invitation will be a summons. Use the police if you must. The police, I said, and raised both eyebrows for flourish. Inspector Kramer, he said dryly, likes nothing I do, including breathing, but he likes fakes less. Tell him a man presented himself as the late Mr. Vickery and used the wires in a private house to enforce presence. He will come because he will want to dislike it in person. He touched the place card with his name. And bring Mr. Pearlie Stebbins if he wants to watch someone perspire. Which someone? Whichever tries to leave first, Wolfe said. It is the privilege of guilt to be impatient. I took the card with the wax. You want this in a drawer or under a microscope? Neither, he said, briefly on the radiator. I looked at him. You want to make a dead man sweat? The gold dust pressed into the wax will bleed free at a fixed point, he said. If the dust is jeweler's rouge or filings from a red-gold blank, it will scent the air differently than Latakia. I want to know which room our host worked in, a cellar with a grindstone or a club with a cigar. I set the card close to the radiator and watched the shine soften. In 3 minutes, the room's perfume changed by half a hair. Smoke gave way to a metallic sweetness that didn't belong to plants or dinner. Wolfe tilted his head and let his nostrils render their verdict. Workshop, he said. He has a bench somewhere, not a mortuary. The ring is new work, the phone muttered again. Lon Cohen this time, all bubbles. Archie, darling, your Edward Vickery is either alive or haunting my copy desk. Words out that a spectre ate fish on Gramercy. You want me to sit on it? If you like your popovers, I said. Sit. For how long? Until 11 tomorrow, I said. Then you can call it what you like. Spell my name right. I hung up and looked at Wolfe. You just put tickets on sale. They were already printing them, he said. He folded his hands, closed his eyes, and let his breath go the way he does when he is chewing logic. Mr. Goodwin, I will not have my house scented with Latakia without consent. Our antagonist enjoys perfumes. So shall we. Tomorrow, before the gathering, move Fritz's jar of grains of paradise where a man with knowledge will reach for it, and remove the mace. I wish to watch a hand choose. You want to catch a cook or a counterfeit? I asked. Both, he said. The difference between a chef and a forger is the arrogance with which they season. One believes the eater will not notice. The other believes he will and be grateful. He opened his eyes. We will find which one we entertain. I pocketed the Hilliard bag deeper and gave him the last garnish. The host said to tell you it would have been an honor. Wolfe's mouth went thin. I do not accept honors from puppeteers, he said. I accept forfeits. He glanced at the radiator card and then at me. Tomorrow we will collect one. At 11 sharp the next morning, our office was upholstered with people. Caroline sat straight as a blade in the red leather chair nearest Wolfe's desk. Stephen perched stiffly 2 seats away, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else but determined not to yield ground. Graham Lott sweated into a handkerchief large enough to cover a bedstead. Lenore Quay made her languor an accusation. Marius Bell tapped his fingers in a rhythm that belonged in a kitchen, not an interrogation. And Keene, starched and pale, stood near the door as if he'd been ordered to stand guard over his own conscience. Kramer and Stebbins took up the corners, Kramer already puffing his cigar smoke like he meant to fumigate the brownstone of its trespass. Wolfe had let the silence fatten itself before he spoke. He sat behind his desk, huge and still, hands steepled in front of him as if the weight of the world was not nearly as interesting as the bowl of orchids behind him. At last, he opened his eyes and aimed them like spotlights. You were all present last night, he said, at a performance staged to revive a man who is, and remains, dead. The imposture was a deception, but one calculated with such fidelity that it persuaded even those who knew him best. It is intolerable, Stephen gave a dry laugh. Tell that to the corpse who ate his dinner." "Phooey," Wolfe said. "You were gulled by pantomime." "Mr. Goodwin, that was my cue. I laid the Hilliard and Sons bag on the desk, then the place card stamped with a stag crest as fresh as new snow. Stationer on Madison sold a box of this paper and a stick of red wax 8 days ago. Paid cash. Buyer wore gloves. Smelled like Latakia. Saul Panzer traced it. Clark says the buyer asked about sealing rings. Add to that." I held up the card. "The impression is too clean. No scars. No wear. Ring is a fake or a recent recut. Edward's ring went into the ground and stayed there. This one was born last month in a jeweler's back room." Lenore's breath hitched, genuine or staged. Graham wiped his brow. Wolfe went on as if they hadn't moved. "The impostor demonstrated knowledge of Mr. Vickery's habits, menus, wines, spices. He also demonstrated access to Mrs. Vickery's study, where the stationery and seal were kept. The lock is new. The drawer has been entered. That narrows our field to those with opportunity and motive." Kramer blew smoke like a cannon. "So who's our Hamlet, Wolfe?" "Quit varnishing. I do not varnish," Wolfe said sharply. "I deduce." He turned back to the room. "Mr. Lott, your appetite for accounts is well known. You palmed a note beneath your card last night. You know you did." "What did it say?" Graham floundered, crimson. It said nothing worth repeating." "Wrong," Wolfe said. "It said precisely what you fear, that your siphoning from the club accounts has been observed. It was bait to keep you compliant. You are not the impostor. You are a victim with greasy fingers." Graham sagged. Kramer grunted, scribbling. "Mr. Bell," Wolfe continued, "you would not have had the patience for such a production. You might have stabbed a man at the table, but you would not stage one. Your value to the impostor was culinary knowledge and temperamental fireworks. You, too, were a pawn." Marius smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Quay," Wolfe said, turning his gaze, "you watched the impostor's mouth, not his ring. You looked for a lover, not a master. Your vanity betrays you. You are not the puppeteer." She flushed, but held her chin high. "Mr. Stephen Vickery." Wolfe let the name hang. "You wrote to lawyers, pressing to sell the house. You had motive to unsettle your sister-in-law, to make her seem unstable, to force a sale. Yet you lacked imagination. No, you were invited as bait for your own greed." Stephen's fists clenched, but his lips stayed shut. "That leaves," Wolfe said, voice dropping. "Mr. Keene." The butler stiffened. "You alone knew the table's old rhythms," Wolfe went on. "You alone could tune wires beneath the cloth to bells in the pantry. You alone could place envelopes without discovery. Your tremor last night was not fear of deceit. It was fear of recognition. The impostor relied on you to conduct his play. You gave him cues. You made his resurrection possible." Keene's lips parted. I did not." "You did," Wolfe said coldly. "But you did not do it alone. The man himself is not in this room. He is a fraudster, an actor, schooled in Edward Vickery's habits, armed with a counterfeit ring and Caroline's stolen stationery. But without you, Mr. Keene, he would have stumbled. Without you, the bells would not have chimed on cue. Without you, the table would not have spoken." Kramer barked. "So you're saying the butler did it?" "No," Wolfe said with disdain. "The butler abetted it. The impostor is another. Keene, who is he?" Keene swallowed hard. His starched shirt front looked suddenly damp. He said Edward had promised him the club once, that he deserved the role. He came to me with the ring, with the seal, with words only Mr. Vickery could have spoken. I thought, perhaps—" His voice cracked. He called himself Philip Anders. An actor Edward once patronized. He had studied him for years. Kramer grunted, scribbling again. "Anders. That a real name?" "It will serve," Wolfe said. "You will find him easily now." He cannot resist his own performance. I watched the room digest it. Caroline's eyes were sharp as flint. Stephen's grey with relief or fury. Graham sagged into guilt. Lenore toyed with her gloves. Marius flexed his fingers like knives. Wolfe leaned back, final as a gavel. The impostor wished to resurrect a man who had mastered the table. But Edward Vickery is dead. What remains is artifice, and artifice collapses once the strings are cut. Mr. Kramer, you have your man. Mr. Goodwin, you have your evidence. Mrs. Vickery, you have your peace, if you will keep it. Caroline rose, steadier than she had been in days. I will, she said simply. The room broke then. Kramer calling Stebbins to move. Graham muttering, Stephen glowering, Lenore sighing theatrically, Marius cursing under his breath. Keene stayed rooted, his face grey. When the last of them were gone and Fritz had aired the room, Wolfe reached for his beer. He sipped, smacked his lips, and spoke. Pfui, a resurrection at table, the most grotesque of vanities. Men cannot bear their own extinction. They arrange encore after encore and expect us to applaud. Fools. A meal ends when it ends. He set the glass down with finality. Archie, have Fritz prepare lunch, and see that my chair remains mine alone. I grinned because the brownstone was whole again, the sanctity restored. Wolfe had cut the strings, and the phantom of Edward Vickery had vanished where he belonged, back into the grave, without dessert. If you think Kramer hates being handed a name without a door to knock on, you're right. He left with Stebbins snarling about theater and frauds, and promised to bark up every midtown casting agency until someone yelped. That would have been fine with me if I didn't have Saul. By 2:15 Saul had a thread. By 3 he had a sweater. A sublet over a shuttered rehearsal studio on West 47th, 4th floor walk-up, mail slot stuffed with circulars addressed to P. Anders and 2 others that had learned to answer to Philip Arden. The hall smelled like dust and ambition. The door's lock had too many scratches for a careful man, and not enough for a burglar. We brought Kramer. He brought a warrant and Stebbins, who looked at the building the way he looks at oysters. The door opened after our second knock. The man who stood there had the same posture I'd watched sit at Caroline's table. Even weight, soft knees, an old habit of letting a room come to him. Without the silver and the candles, he looked smaller. Without the chorus, he sounded thinner when he said, "Can I help you?" He didn't ask who we were. He already knew. The air inside was 3 parts Latakia and 1 part at something sweet and metallic that made Wolfe's radiator trick look like prophecy. On a bench by the window sat a jeweler's vice, a scattering of red gold filings like glitter on dark felt, a loop, and a ring mandrel that had worn a square more than once. Beside it lay Essex rag paper with practice crests pressed until the page puckered, a box from Hilliard & Sons, empty of pretense. On another table, a stack of table diagrams with circles labeled in a neat hand. Caroline, Stephen, Graham, Lenore, Marius, and a blank where he had written NEROWOLFE and then crossed it out with a single line. A coil of thin bell wire lay next to a brass bar like the one in Keene's pantry, and 2 knee buttons the size of shirt studs with small screws still attached. If you wanted to build a resurrection and you lacked a body, it was a tidy hardware store. Kramer didn't show him the room. He showed him the warrant. Anders, Arden, or a man whose name had never been anything but the part he was playing, looked at the paper, then at me. "Tell Mr. Wolfe I did not intend trespass," he said softly. "I intended homage. You intended leverage," I told him. On a widow, a butler, a partner with sticky fingers, a brother with a lawyer, and a chef who can be wound like a clock. You needed their attention and their fear. You wanted a club and a name and a stage. His mouth made a rueful shape that wanted to pass for charm. "He promised me the room once," he said, when I played him for 12 paying patrons and he cried into his napkin. He said, "You could do this for me, Philip, if I ever fall." Then he fell. I thought I was honoring a wish. "You honored yourself," I said. "You stole a seal, you cut a ring, you rented an audience, and you tried to borrow Wolfe's spine to prop your story." Kramer moved like a bulldozer with feelings. "You're under arrest for criminal impersonation, fraud, burglary, and whatever else the DA thinks will look pretty on you. Stebbins, inventory the toys Anders didn't fight. He watched the bench like a man watching his dog be taken away for quarantine. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe let me give it to him straight, without parsley. The bench, the filings, the wax, the diagrams, the knee buttons, the bell bar, the Hilliard box, the ring mandrel, the alias. Kramer had Keen downtown by then, giving a statement that came out in fits. Anders had come to him with the ring and the crest and sentences that sounded like Edward's voice speaking from underwater. He had told Keen it would keep Caroline's memory clean. No lawsuits, no scandal. A final dinner to put the dogs off their sniffing. Keen had believed just enough to be used and too much to stop. Wolfe listened with his eyes shut and his lips arranged for disapproval. When I finished, he opened them and pointed at the radiator, where the wax card from last night sat turned brittle and faintly iridescent. "Gold filings," he said. "Workshop, not grave." "You saw, I saw," I said. "I also saw you leave a hook out for pride." He crossed your name on the diagram after he saw my place card. It bothered him enough to put a line through it instead of throwing it away. He wanted you there to certify him. That was the one too many. Not a chair hidden in the room. He needed an extra appetite at the table. Yours, Wolfe's eyes warmed half a degree. No, the 7th place was not me. It was his vanity. He set it and set it again and could not resist counting himself twice. He is not the first man to make 2 of himself in order to eat better. He shifted, which for him is an earthquake. Still, you may tell yourself what you like. He rang for Fritz, and we spent 2 minutes discussing lunch like civilized men who happened to have an actor cooling in a precinct and a butler sweating into a confession. When the bell stopped clinking, Wolfe said, "Mrs. Vickery?" She sent a note. Keen admitted what he'd done. She won't prosecute him for burglary if Kramer can see him as a witness and not a prize. She will prosecute Anders for everything the law has a drawer for. And she asks if she should close the dining room. Wolfe looked over my shoulder at his orchids, the way a man looks at a cemetery and a garden at once. No, the dining room is not at fault for the mouths that misuse it. She should open it when she can stand to hear knives again, but she should never again permit a bell to ring without her hand. The ritual must be hers. He had a second beer and another thought. "Mr. Lott?" "Sent his lawyer to the DA, ready to make restitution before they ask. He will call it a reconciliation. The papers will call it a misunderstanding. He will stop watching the door when there is no one left to knock. Mr. Stephen Vickery?" He is telling himself he was protecting the estate. He is also avoiding mirrors. He has told Caroline he will not write the lawyer again. For now, Miss Quay? "She will choose a new project," I said. "It will be a dog that needs rescuing or a painter who is noble and poor. She will not choose an actor for a while. Mr. Bell?" He will pay the boy and not throw knives for a month, and then he will throw something else. But perhaps he will count to 10 first. Wolfe steepled again. Men rehearse their faults with the same rigor they rehearse their parts. To cure a vice, one must cancel a schedule, not an evening. He cocked his head at me. "And you, Archie?" "I will change my suit," I said. "Latakia makes it smell like I've been smoking in a gentleman's club, and we don't spend enough time in those for it to be a habit." We took delivery of Kramer half an hour later with gratitude and cigar smoke. He gave Wolfe credit as if it had barbs. Anders had folded just enough. He'd found an old Vickery letter sealed with wax at the bottom of a box of club menus in a storage closet, taken its impression in putty, had a red gold ring cut off 26th Street, bought paper and wax from Hilliard, and drilled keen with cues until the old rhythms felt like destiny. The notes to Graham were blackmail wrapped in a dead man's scrawl. The parcel with the knife was theatre to keep the room rigid. The phone call about grains of paradise had been a flourish after he sniffed our spice rack. Kramer said a jury would hate him and love the story. Wolfe said juries loved their own appetites best, and that would do. When they left, the brownstone settled an inch. I sat and let the chair know it had done good work. Wolfe eyed the place card with his name and, with 2 fingers, slid it into a drawer he uses for mementos he won't admit to liking. The sanctity of a room, he said, depends on whether we keep our hands where they belong. Keene will suffer because he mistook devotion for duty. Anders will suffer because he mistook art for license. And you? I asked. I, he said, closing the drawer. We'll eat. At dinner, Fritz served a simple roast and vegetables that had not been rearranged by any man's ego. Wolfe took his time with both. When we finished, he leaned back and gave me the line I knew was coming, polished to his liking. A table is an agreement, he said. We gather to be nourished, not to be convinced we do not die. Men who require encores at supper deserve to be shown out before dessert fare, I said. But the Barolo was good. He snorted. The Barolo was vulgar. I let that sit because the night was quiet, and the chairs were where they belonged. The case had started with a letter that smelled like tobacco and ended with a stage where the curtain had dropped in the right place. Caroline would decide what to do with her dining room. Keene would decide what to do with his conscience. Anders would have a new audience, without props. Wolfe would have orchids and punctual beer. And me, I'd have a fresh tie, an appointment with a cleaner, and the satisfaction of watching a ghost sit down and then get up again like a man. Kramer had left with his prize and Stebbins lumbering behind, and the house was once again as it should be. No actors, no impostors, no wires humming under chairs. Fritz had shut the door with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has preserved order in his kitchen, and the only scent left in the office was Wolfe's beer. I sat back, looking at the empty red leather chairs across from the desk, and thought about the ones at Vickery House, where last night had played like a fever dream. Caroline Vickery sent her thanks in writing 2 days later. The note was short, formal, and sealed without a crest. She said the dining room would remain closed for now, not as a tomb, but as a room waiting for its proper use. She had dismissed Keene, without fury, she added, but with finality. A butler who keeps secrets at the table, she wrote, cannot serve in my house. I could almost hear Wolfe grunt approval through the paper. Graham Lott wired restitution into the estate's accounts before the district attorney could sharpen a pencil. Lenore Kay moved on, leaving behind a rumor of a new protégé in the theatre district. Marius Bell lasted 3 weeks before a frying pan met a wall and a patron withdrew support, but that was his nature. Stephen Vickery had gone quiet, licking his wounds in some club where men complained about the death of standard. The stage Anders built collapsed, as all false stages do, leaving only dust. Wolfe, of course, had not budged from his chair through any of it. On the 3rd evening after, he set down his fork and declared the fraud was inevitable. He dabbed his lips, heavy as a verdict. The world is swollen with men who cannot bear that their appetites will one day end. So they contrive continuations, plays, impostures, encores, believing that if they can hold an audience, they can cheat extinction. It is vanity. A meal is finite. It concludes, I said, and dessert. Dessert, he said with the faintest twitch of a smile, is for those who know when to stop eating. That was Wolfe, tidy as ever, wrapping a case with a moral no jury would have phrased so cleanly. He had restored the sanctity of the brownstone without leaving it, cut the strings of an actor who mistook theatre for life, and reminded every one of us that the table only belongs to those who sit honestly. When Fritz cleared, Wolfe leaned back and shut his eyes. "Archie," he murmured, "no more guests this week." "Not even ghosts?" I asked. His eyes opened just enough to pin me. "Especially not ghosts." So the brownstone returned to silence, the table set only for those who belonged, and Nero Wolfe, as always, had the last word, 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 had the